Repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Keeping the palms joined. Palms down. All right, good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all. Thank you for showing up. Thanks for being here. This is my favorite time of year because we just spent 4 months of everybody coming here and complaining about what? It's so cold. You're all so well trained. Look at that. And now what's everybody going to complain about for the next 4 months? It's too hot. This is my favorite lesson around Buddhist teachings because anyone in this room complain? A couple of you. That's good. Yeah, it's so fun running a Buddhist temple in America. Just trying to see how much more I want to say about that. How many of you here for the first time? Only a couple. Okay, not bad. Yeah, it's fun running a Buddhist temple in America. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, it's a funny thing because we spend so much of our lives complaining. And I didn't end up sitting here because I didn't complain about things my entire life. I complained about most things my entire life. I complained about everything my entire life. Even if it was perfect and right, I still complained about it just because I was so conditioned to complain. And Buddhist teaching comes along and tells you to be with life as it is. And then often we default into this habitual pattern of behavior of just still complaining about things our whole life. But we're trying to kind of bring that together with this idea of being with life as it is. So then we figure out, okay, well, how can we, I can't tell you what you all do to manipulate your crazy heads, but I'm just talking about myself. Then I figured out how to justify what complaints were still valid. Yes, but the things I held on to, the views I held on to, the judgments I held on to, all the things that I, in my mind, am convinced that I have every right to complain about. And ultimately, this practice is not about whether you have a right to complain about it or not. It's about understanding that you're just complaining. And to begin to look at why. And so for me, Buddhist temples, at least in my experience with them, early on, it was really just a place and a thing that you just show up to and you just drop everything. Meaning you drop your pride, you drop your ego, you drop your expectations, you drop your complaints, and you just show up. Because we don't have too many places like that in our lives. Even think about where you live, right? You spend so much time, or maybe you're in a new place and you've crafted it and you've built it and you've surrounded it with everything you like and love and know and comfortable and all that kind of stuff, and yet still complain. So for me, a Buddhist temple, I'm not even talking about here, but just how I was introduced to it, was a place to where there's no complaints. You just show up and you become part of that space. And that's it. And that is so difficult for, I don't want to say just Western people, because it's difficult for all people. I'm not excluding non-Western folks, but it's incredibly difficult for Western folks when you show up to something that's relatively new, and we're just so used to crafting it, having it be a certain way. So that's why I love the opportunities, that create difficulties for us in spaces like this. such as the weather changing, and now everybody, all the hosts spent 4 months complaining about they didn't know how to turn on the heat. Now what are they going to complain about for the next 4 months? They don't know how to turn on the air. The beauty is, by the time they figure out how to turn on the air, it's going to be cold again. So, yeah, or the fans, So it's fun. Glad you're all here. Those of you who are here for the first time, why? Why did you show up? Just other than to be told to stop complaining, which is really all you need to know. So
my life's a mess. I was doing pretty good for a while. I ended up in the hospital with panic attack stuff, and I've been practicing, but not very diligently in the last few years. So
nice. Well, welcome. Glad you're here, Brian. Right?
Yep.
Yeah. Welcome. What else? Anyone else who's here for the first time want to share why? Yeah.
Also Brian.
Yeah.
So I've kind of dabbled in Buddhist philosophy on and off for decades.
Yeah.
But I find having an intellectual understanding of the precepts is quite different between the practice. So I'm trying to focus on that a bit more.
Yeah. Incredibly difficult. So, that third of the triple gem, the Sangha, the community, the space, is really critical. And being reminded, we don't spend a lot of time around people that are trying to observe precepts, right? I mean, most people, unless you're living in a Buddhist temple or monastery. So, well, welcome. Anybody else, first time, want to explain why you're here or share why you're here? All right, cool. So we'll start with the meditation practice. For those who are joining virtually, welcome. Glad you're here. Thanks for showing up. I hope the temperature is as you like it wherever you are. A couple things I'll tell you before we begin. For those who might be new or sitting for the first time, nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice, meaning don't ask yourself, is this working or not working? Are you doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit, we're going to breathe. You'll hear sounds inside, sounds outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos. And this practice is learning to get quiet and still within all of the chaos. Posture, you just want to be comfortable if you are on a cushion. Often it helps slide into the front third. Pushing the stomach forward allows the back to straighten. Shoulders are relaxed. Hands can be on the knees or lap, whatever is comfortable. If you are sitting for the first time, you're not going to shut off your mind. You're not going to think nothing. You're not going to go blank. You're just going to continue to race with thoughts. I'll say things periodically to wake you up or remind you that you're lost in thought and bring you back to present moments. I'll guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. Starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. Eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath, expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. Breathing in, follow breath in. Breathing out, Follow breath out. Letting go of expectations. Letting go of judgments from the practice. Just sitting, breathing. learning to be comfortable in stillness, in quiet, just sitting, breathing. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. And no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. And once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And as you slowly open the eyes, slowly beginning to move. Most important with the practice of meditation is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how you sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It's everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being, no different than any one of us, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. What that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless of where you come from or what you believe in or where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens. More reactions. That's it. This practice is simply learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to every other 20-minute period of your day. And so all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. It's not an easy practice. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape, as often people think it is. It's direct perception into the present moment. And present moment is filled with conflict, chaos, difficulties, challenges. That's what we get every day. And so this practice is simply learning what it's like to be with all the conflict and chaos and difficulties and challenges that arise. Because that will never go away. We spend so much time trying to fix, change, control, manipulate everything and everyone around us. And this practice is working on our mind and our reaction to the world around us. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. It's just sitting, breathing, becoming aware of everything you think, everything you say, and everything you do. And how your thoughts and your words and your actions impact your life and the life of those around you. That's it. I try to keep this practice really simple. And I've found that to be the most beneficial way to utilize and integrate Buddhist teachings into life, is to not complicate it. Your karma, which is your actions, your thoughts, your words, and your deeds. How that impacts your life. And that's it. And when you begin to see how it impacts your life, then you immediately also see how it impacts the life of those around you. Sometimes immediately you see that, and sometimes it, ripple effect takes a while. So if we constantly practice cultivating kind thoughts, kind words, and kind actions, then hopefully we're cultivating a kinder, gentler, peaceful environment around us. But it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes no matter how many gentle thoughts and words and actions you have, the person next to you is not in the same boat, not even in the same planet. And that's why we practice. Of course, it'd be nice if everybody just thought exactly how we did, especially when we know we're right. So if everybody just thought what you did, said what you did, and did what you did, then life would be great. But never going to happen. So with that, I'll pause. For me, just prefer to respond to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice. And again, to those joining virtually, glad you're here. Welcome. Thank you for showing up. Feel free as you are to say hello in the chat box there. I'll point out also, for those who do join virtually, we know the last couple of weeks we've had some difficulty streaming with stuff, and so we have somebody coming out next week to look at some just upgraded solutions for streaming. So probably 9 out of 10 times we're okay, but we know it's been a little rough the last couple of weeks. So thank you for hanging in, and we're working on getting a better system in place so the millions of people who watch us can watch seamlessly. It's actually a really funny story, and I'll open up to question. Many of you know Mark, not here with us today, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind if I share this story, but the first time he ever led, we set this up, and so he was looking at it, and it tells you how many people are watching, but it also tells you how many subscribers you have. And I don't know, we have like 3,000 something subscribers. But he sat down, and for the first time ever, he was seeing this, and he thought that there were like 3,000 people watching it. And then he looked to the left, and it said like 6. He felt more comfortable. So, yeah. Anyways, so open up to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with. Yeah.
I just have a coincidence that happened to me. Yesterday I had a friend call, and she likes to make up new words for things. And she said, I have a new word. And I said, what is it? She goes, it's gronky. And she said, it means complaining as a form of conversation.
Huh.
And she said, complaining is too soft a word for that. You need something more guttural, more harsh. So it's gronky.
She just made it up.
And I'm going, oh my God, and I get here and you're talking about complaining.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh.
Yes, and you and your friend have labeled it.
Since yesterday I'm thinking about like, all right, do I complain as a form of conversation? Well, yeah, I probably do.
Yes.
So it's been on my mind, and then to have you talk about it's very nice thing.
That's funny. Yeah. One of the precepts, the Buddhist teachings, you look at right speech, and if you break down in the Vinaya, which is the code of conduct where they list there were 227 to 311 precepts that the monks and nuns followed, and around right speech, the obvious ones of is it honest, is it true, to not use divisive speech, things that cause harm, but one of them also is to refrain from gossip and slander. That's hard. And you're absolutely right. So much of our conversation is based on sitting down and just saying, okay, well, what can we're just going to sit for an hour and complain.
Oh, it's so much fun.
It's so much fun. And I don't want to ruin your fun. I'm not here to ruin your fun. But I share the story often about the first time Ajahn Jeff Tandasar Bhikkhu is the head monk up at Metaphors Monastery, and they really follow these precepts like, word for word. 2,500 years later, in that tradition, they follow these precepts. And so idle chatter, not even just gossip, but no idle chatter. So it's like, what would you even... So I remember the first time I met him kind of one-on-one personally, and he came here. I shared the story a while ago, but he came in early as he was going to give a talk. And I remember sitting on the back pew with him. He was sitting, I was standing, and knowing the precepts and knowing that he follows them and thinking like, what are we going to talk about? And you know what we said? Almost nothing.
Yeah.
And it was nice. It was awkward. It was like, how can you, so I often challenge people. I've thrown this out a lot over the years, but next time you have a meal with somebody, try having a meal in silence. And not because you're angry and, upset at them and you're in a fight. But actually just try to have a meal with somebody where you're just observing the meal. You're observing the company. You're observing whatever is happening in that moment. But you're not just talking. And see what that's like. And for those of you who do have, I almost said issues. I don't want to call it an issue. But for those of you who do have maybe habitual patterns and behaviors of just gossiping and slandering constantly, pick that as a precept and say, I'm going to try this today.
What about observations? Like when you're eating your meal, like, oh, doesn't this taste good? Or... Look
at you trying to manipulate and justify. And just because you're trying so hard to figure out how to get out of it, no. You cannot do that either. Yes, silence. But it's a cool thing to just observe how uncomfortable it can possibly be. But to pick any of these precepts and say, okay, today, we'll be done here in 20 minutes, it'll be noon. So it's a lot harder when it's an earlier class. If it's 7 o'clock, you only have to get through the last few hours of your night. But try all day to see what it would be like to not talk about somebody else in any way. Either praise or the opposite of that. But see, if nothing else, I'm just going to plant in your head that all day today to become aware of how much you talk about other people. It's a lot of our dialogue.
It's just something that's been on my mind quite a bit is like, maybe just starting off with like a small period of silence first, and just and I mean obviously since you're talking about it, it's like dang, right place, right time.
Yeah, just seeing what as we integrate these practices into our lives. For me, I'm never a big fan of kind of all or nothing, all in. I think that burns out. I like kind of this middle path, and pacing yourself. You know, I remember years ago, Alex gave a talk on the precepts one night. It was really beautiful. And he said his take on it always was that precepts are not things that you should force into your life, that as you continue to cultivate loving kindness and compassion toward yourself and others, the precepts just happen naturally versus forcing them into your life. But yeah, an awareness of them. What else?
Just
Go ahead, hang on. We'll go here, there, and then the back. Go ahead.
I just have a comment. It's not a question.
Yeah.
We're talking about silent meals. I went up to Deer Park Monastery in Escondido, and you can go visit for a day, and that's one of the things they do. They serve a vegetarian lunch, and it's a completely silent meal. Everybody just eats together. Most peaceful meal in my life.
Right?
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. Yeah. Love it. Go ahead.
I had a question, like about root cause of suffering. Ignorance is one of them. What you did last week about anger, focusing on compassion really helped me. But ignorance, that also includes fear, anxiety, worrying, all these different areas. And one, I guess, of the antidote is wisdom. So would you talk about wisdom from a Buddhist perspective, and how can I cultivate more wisdom so that my mind doesn't go in these dark places? And
Sure. Sure. I'm glad it only took you a week to conquer anger. That's great. It's not as bad. Yeah. No, it's beautiful.
It's better.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful. I mean, I think collectively we all love your questions. We love your again, I don't like to use the progress, but you're working on this stuff and it's important. I think it's beautiful. So I just want to take a moment to like honor and respect that. You know, I know I tease you a lot and that's kind of our banter, but I really think it's beautiful how hard you work on this stuff. And so your question around, just to back up a little bit around the ignorance, but for those who are maybe new or don't know, root cause of suffering, as the Buddha said, first noble truth, life is filled with dukkha, suffering, discomfort, angst, dissatisfaction. Things just don't go our way much of our lives. The second is the cause of suffering. This is your question. And the three poisons are often referred to as greed, anger, ignorance. And we overcome greed with generosity, we overcome anger with compassion, we overcome ignorance with wisdom, and I'll come back to that. The third noble truth is the ending of suffering, liberation, nirvana, and freedom from suffering. And the fourth is the path, and this is the Eightfold Path, working on the correct views, thoughts, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, concentration. All of that on Google for free, and stick on the first two Google search pages and you're good to go. But so your question around ignorance and wisdom, so as you're saying, you're recognizing ignorance and you want to kind of the antidote is wisdom according to Buddhist teachings. So the Buddha asked Subhuti, one of his disciples, greatest disciples in wisdom, to sit down and give a discourse on wisdom. So everybody gathered around, Subhuti sat down. You know what Subhuti said? Nothing. And then after a period of time, the Buddha kind of patted him on the back and said, good job. He said nothing of ignorance. So when I first heard that teaching, I was like, well, that's not helping me at all. Because I want to know. I remember years ago, a college kid kept pulling out a dictionary of like what wisdom meant, you know, as if some Webster person knew what wisdom was, you know. Like, how do we define wisdom? And for me as a practice, what I've ultimately settled on, first, looking at ignorance. Ignorance is not dumb, or when we hear the word ignorance, what we might jump to. Ignorance, I love, years ago I heard somebody say it has the word ignore in it. We're ignoring reality. So ignorance is us ignoring reality, meaning things as they are. So my first question to you is, how often are you stuck in ignorance in seeing the world as you see it versus how it is?
Often. I numb, I do all sorts. I suddenly have to go do something because I don't want to sit with being uncomfortable.
Right.
And anxious.
Yeah. So then the question that you're asking, which is, then how do we practice wisdom? How do we cultivate wisdom to have less ignorance? And I think for me as a practice, instead of focusing on what is ultimate wisdom, as if it's this goal that we have to attain, do you know very often when you think, say, or do things that are just harmful and are unhealthy and you shouldn't do?
Sometimes I don't always know.
Okay, but sometimes you do.
Sometimes I know it's not a good idea and I do it anyway. Yeah.
Right, and sometimes you know it's not a good idea and you do it anyways. So to me, wisdom would be stop doing that and do that less.
So when I become aware, say, oh, okay, then just become aware when I'm doing things like that, then just say, well, what else can I do that would be maybe?
Yes, don't do those things. So here's ignorance, lost in our world, our views are right, our perceptions are right, everybody else is wrong, mine is the best way, this is the only way, you're all messed up, I'm perfect. That whole view is ignorance. So if you do that less, By default, what is that cultivating? More what?
I'm becoming wiser.
You're becoming wiser. You said it, not me. Yes. So it's not about, it's different from when we talked last week about cultivating compassion to overcome ignorance, and I very clear, or overcome anger. And I said, okay, if you're lost in anger, go do things that are compassionate. It doesn't have to be so linear. Just go practice compassion somewhere else. Cultivate that. This is a little bit different for me as a practice. It's not about going to do the wisest thing, but in many cases, not doing the thoughts or the words, or not acting on the thoughts or words that we're thinking by default is much wiser. So yeah, do those things less. Yeah, in the back.
The first part is the dangers of wisdom. I had some health challenges, and I've been diving deeply into being more healthy with diet and exercise. And I've lost 5 friends within the last year and a half, mostly on what I believe are dietary or poor dietary lifestyle changes. So now that I'm getting myself healthier, I go to places and see people who have health issues just grabbing candy bars and cookies first, eating like food is going to be taken away from them. And the false wisdom is that, what are they doing? I guess they don't want to live very long, like coming off of operations and just going back to that pattern. So I've been in a little struggle of my wisdom versus their attitudes. And, I kind of missed events because I don't want to be drawn back into this bad lifestyle. Yeah. So
let's see. You're relatively new, so I'm going to be relatively nice. So you're touching on something that I think, well, one, first, very seriously, like I feel for you. It's hard, and I'm sorry for the friends and the loss. It's painful. So I first want to kind of honor and acknowledge that. And second, it's great that you've made changes in your life around health issues and found a path that works for you. But I think that's very important to understand, is who is that path working for? You. It's not everybody else's path. Regardless of what you think, regardless of what science says, regardless of what nutrition says, regardless of all that, everybody is on their own path, right? There's a phrase I talk about every so often called Buddhist arrogance, where what happens is we get into this Buddhist thing. We're in it all of like 3 weeks. And all we do is talk about wisdom and compassion and read Pema Chodron and Dalai Lama, and we think everything is so gentle and beautiful. And then we start judging and labeling everybody else according to our new 3-week-old view. Like, I'm so compassionate. I don't gossip anymore. And then all of a sudden you're judging the person that you were just gossiping with 2 weeks ago. Right? So everybody is on their own journey. And I loved, even in the way you asked the question, you said your newfound wisdom versus their something else, right?
I said the dangers or something like that.
You didn't say dangers, but you said maybe you did, but you said something else. So you were comparing your wisdom to their lack of wisdom.
Well, actually, I started off saying how my thoughts, so-called wisdom, was actually interfering. That was my point.
Interfering with what?
It's interfering with me being comfortable with some other people.
So you're recognizing that you're judging them.
That was my point. Maybe I did not.
Oh, no, I didn't catch that. So thank you for adding to that. I was pointing out your judgment, and you were actually, that was the basis of your question.
My question was the struggle between...
Yes. So Buddhist arrogance. You were there. How long ago have you been on this healthy journey?
A couple of weeks.
For those at home, he said a couple weeks. I thought you were at least going to say a couple years, but yeah. No. So, yeah, I don't have much more to add to that, but yes, it's beautiful that you see that. It's beautiful that you recognize that. It's beautiful that you see you're kind of stuck. And, from a personal experience, without going too far into it right now, when I talk about this often, but when I first came back from monastery life after a year, 11 months, and all of a sudden I was now, judging the people that I was hanging out with before. And I realized there's no wisdom in that whatsoever. That was my arrogance. That was my ego that said, I'm now better than you because of this. And they were doing the things that literally the day before I left for the monastery, I was doing with them. And so now all of a sudden I was judging them for it. And then after about a year or two, I got myself to a place, and I think this is really addressing your question. After about a year or two of exploring my own journey, I brought myself to a place where I was able to spend time with them, be around them, even when they were doing the things. Like you said, grabbing the cookies, right? We'll just call it grabbing the cookies. When they were grabbing the cookies, I was able to be with them while they were grabbing cookies and not grab a cookie. And also not think that they're terrible people for grabbing the cookies. Right? So just keep working on that. Yeah.
If I may add just a comment on eating in silence.
Yeah.
I grew up, my dad demanded absolute silence, not as a practice or anything, just as a control issue.
Yeah.
When I'm home from work, I'm in charge here, where I wasn't in charge at work. And so he demanded that. And it became kind of a competition to be able to get out. I was waiting around all day to talk to my dad. And I would bolt my food. I never tasted it. It was, very bad nutritional habit, unhealthy, and couldn't enjoy things, pour things on, eat quickly. I've continued that, and that's something now I'm working on.
Yeah.
But it was used in a poor way.
Yeah. All these things that we share obviously are just general ideas and concepts, and some things can trigger us. And so to be aware of that is important. Other thoughts?
A good way I think could be very beneficial. Calming, because you're working while you're eating. You're digesting, you're tasting. And silence adds to your sense of taste and all that.
Yeah, thank you. What else? Other thoughts, questions? Yeah.
No stories, no details, just a question.
All right.
Okay. Are psychedelics considered to be intoxicants?
Do you really need me to answer that?
As a matter of fact, yes, I do. Being sincere.
Yeah. No, so am I. So the question, let me back up. The question was, are psychedelics are psychedelics considered intoxicants? So when we look at the precepts, to touch on this briefly without going into a whole precept talk, the basic 5 precepts are to refrain from lying, to refrain from killing or harming, actually, just harming, to refrain from stealing and taking what's not yours, to refrain from sexual misconduct, and to refrain from intoxicants. Now, the teaching around intoxicants, very seriously, when I say we, meaning I think the collective Buddhist world translates intoxicants in the modern day to drugs and alcohol. Very often you hear people talk about intoxicants as like no drugs, no alcohol. But our mind is intoxicated with things all day long. Ultimately, the meaning behind no intoxicants is ultimately anything that alters the state of mind. And this isn't about whether it's, I'm going to add to this because there's an important piece to this, but the precept is not about right or wrong. Very difficult for new people in Buddhism, or even long-time people in Buddhism to understand. These precepts are not about right and wrong. These are not about judgments of like you're a good Buddhist or a bad Buddhist if you do or don't do these things. What the precepts were initially built for, as you've heard, but for those who don't know, was to keep the Sangha, the community, at the time of the Buddhists, safe. And as things happened that caused division or discord or lack of harmony in the Sangha, precepts were created, right? So this idea of